So let's have a look at the employment and participation rate, or the unemployment as part of that story. So the ABS released their seasonally adjusted unemployment rates, which held steady at 4.1% in May, unchanged from the previous 2 months and in line with market expectations. The number of unemployed people declined by 2,600 to 618,300 people, with those seeking full-time jobs falling 16,100 to 415,200, while those looking for part-time jobs increased by 13,500 to 203,000. Meanwhile, employment unexpectedly fell by 2,500 jobs to 14.62 million, missing forecasts of around a 25,000 increase after the downwardly revised 87,600 rise in April. Part-time employment declined by 41,100 to 4.52 million, while full-time employment increased by 38,700 to a fresh record high of 10.1 million. The participation rate edged down to a reading of 67% from April's 3-month high of 67.1 and below forecast of a 67.1 reading. The underemployment rate inched down to 5.9% from 6%. Finally, monthly hours worked in all jobs increased by 25 million to 1.994 million hours worked.
So I think what we also need to point out at the moment is that the employment data is really messy.
Well, let's build on that.
Yeah.
Let's build on that with the ANZ Indeed job ads data. And we can see here from ANZ and Indeed that the job ads declined by 1.2% month over month in May. This is the latest data we've got our hands on, making it the second straight month of drops and quickening the downwardly revised 0.3% fall in previous months. Now, and it was quoted as, although the job ad series has remained in a tight range of 114 to 117 over the last year, the May result is in the bottom end of the range and marks the slowest level of job ads since March of 2021, which was reported or said by ANZ economist Aaron Luke. He added that the labour market remains tight whilst robust employment growth and a low unemployment rate. Meanwhile, and we go around the states, Queensland has been the biggest drag on job creation this year, offsetting gains in other parts of Australia, according to the Indeed senior economist Callum Pickering. The report also highlighted steady increases in jobs postings within education software development throughout May. Year-on-year job ads were down 5.7%, but remained 13.66% above pre-pandemic levels. It's still showing job ads down, like that's taking pressure off. I find this result quite interesting.
If you look at what's going on inside the ABS data, it's moving all around with participation rate, full-time and part-time. And then what's not fully reported in it is not just primary employment, but secondary and third. So what we know from a lot of the breakout data and a lot of the surveys that players like ANZ and Indeed do is that the amount of us that actually have a second
multiple or gig economy jobs,
gig economy, side hustles, etc., is slightly starting to change. We're also seeing more and more that the dual income family we know it's the future anyway, but it's at the highest level. It's basically been on record, because what's not in that participation data is that female participation hit another record. And so overall, there's more of us in work, but it's where we're working. And again, the Indeed data shows that we already knew this, that aged care, education, health, they're the 3 largest employers of the last 20 months. And the majority of that is funded by public sector. We know that 80% of growth over the last 12 months has been private sector, and why the government is now starting to talk about productivity commission and this productivity roundtable.
Yes.
Because all of this, if you actually start stripping it out and get a bit more granular, private side is really slow. Public is too high, and we have a problem about the growth of that, which brings us probably to the next chart.
Because it's the care economy, right? That's also there. But here's what we're seeing in public sentiment. So we saw the July numbers from the Westpac Melbourne Institute Consumer Confidence area. So the numbers that matter we've seen obviously a spike in June. So that's a 0.5 of 1% increase, and it's improved by 10.8 over the course of the year. In terms of time to buy a dwelling, we're also seeing that also increase by 3.6, and the increase over the year has moved 28 basis points. And we're seeing that in terms of evidence on the ground, the number of people turning up, the number of competition we have in terms of bidding pretty much around Australia at all the places that we're currently buying. And then, of course, what we've always talked about is this incredible number of the expectations that Australians have that house prices just go up, and they just keep going up, and they're always going to go up. And you can see that reading there, that is an unsustainable reading. That's got to play into the psyche of the RBA.
Yeah.
Like that's speculative levels in terms of house prices always go up.
Yeah. And that's also, again, because the expectation, and we saw this start in October last year, the expectation of rate cuts was going to be a stimulant for housing.
Wealth effect.
Et cetera, et cetera. Yep. Because don't forget, 100 is the neutral point between optimism and pessimism.
Yes.
So we are still technically pessimistic on the consumer side. But the one thing that I can't get over that is still quite fascinating, getting back to what we just talked about with employment, the expectation of losing your job, it just isn't there.
No.
Right. So the unemployment expectation index is the one that always fascinates me, is that it remains really optimistic. We remain quite optimistic about jobs and job employment. The possibility of holding a job or finding a job is what the survey looks for, is still, I mean, as you can see, it's near enough to trend, right? So it's near enough to the 128.9. All of that taken together shows you very clearly that we're getting a little bit out there. And that maybe, as you said, gives the RBA that extra 5 weeks just to see. I mean, the second part that we didn't highlight there is time to buy a major household item. That's now optimistic.
Yeah,
right.
It's moved into optimism territory.
That's a big change. If you look at it year on year, that's a 25% increase, when this time last year was peak.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Right. So there are so many different ways to look at this. And what the RBA has done today, Ben and I, you can tell by us, is sort of going, okay, what are they seeing? What are they reading in the data that has led them to say, we need to just wait a little bit longer? And they, something we've learned in the post sort of cost of living crisis, let's call it that now.
Yep.
Inflation psychology, right? This is the other thing that I think is probably still there, is that, are they worried about stoking? Are they worried about being caught behind with what happened during the end of 21 to 22, that employment is still there, expectations of keeping a job is still there, the expectation about price increases in housing is through the roof, and therefore the time to buy a dwelling, although it's still slightly pessimistic, it's 28% increase from this time last year. That needs to also be all part of it. Can that be the draw line? Maybe.
So here's a question, right? There's definitely a cohort of people who have been doing it tough, right? And there has been absolutely, your money doesn't stretch as far. So there is that cohort. But has that cohort been overly represented in media stories over the last 12 to 18 months because of sales papers, fear sells? But
that would also suggest that the investment bank research and all of the retail banking research is also off the mark.
Well, yeah, but it does change sentiment. Like it does change. Like, in other words, if everyone else is doing it tougher, then I need to probably maybe pull my head in. The same way in which the wealth works in the other direction. And we have been seeing some economists and some banks talking about that. It does feel like the sort of housing crisis and the spending, or the sort of affordability crisis that we've been going through is something that has left some of our psyche. And so maybe this is their way of effectively saying, well, we do want people to still keep their money in their wallets just for a little bit longer, to basically make sure that we do bake in that we don't want to have an upward cycle inflation too quickly. So we're going to take and hedge our bets in that story.
Yeah.